healthcare. And I'll give a couple examples to try to clarify what I mean by that. Every other profession in organizations, companies in this province, the biggest thing stressed upon them is workplace safety, accountability, if it's government, if it's business, if it's WMIS programs that companies need to ensure their employees have, workplace safety courses that the employees need to take, Mr. Speaker. But in healthcare, those checks and balances, that accountability is not really there as much as it is prominent in other businesses and other organizations in the province. You think about an individual, a physician, and I attended a session yesterday morning dealing with my paramedic license, Mr. Speaker, something called M&Ms, which a lot of the doctors, nurses, and paramedics do. And what that is you go and you get together and you review an interesting case that usually went wrong. And I think that's very important for healthcare professionals and healthcare providers to go back, look at what went wrong in this case, look at mistakes that were made to try to, hopefully not allow them to happen in the future. So I was attending this one at Cobequid Centre yesterday, and it talked a little bit about a physician who had a case that was similar to that, and I won't get into details with that because of privacy, but one of the comments he made, and it really struck home, was that in healthcare, you have a person like a physician. He can take you as a member of the public within minutes off the streets and bring you in and give you a life-altering medication, which could be better for your health outcome, or it could be detrimental. It happens. There's mistakes. And only in health can that happen so quickly without the checks and balances. And one of his things that he was trying to get across was that we do need to start placing more of those checks and balances, more accountability in healthcare to ensure that these things don't happen. Human error is always going to be there, Mr. Speaker, especially in healthcare, especially in emergency room healthcare, because it's so stressful. It's such a busy environment. You're dealing with many people at one time needing your full attention and needing medications and procedures, Mr. Speaker. And he said we need to have more checks, more balances, more accountability in healthcare so that those accidents don't happen, so that those medications that he might prescribe to a patient don't negatively affect them, cause them harm. And I relate this a lot to this piece of legislation, because under the Hospital Act now, you have the ability, or a physician, someone with a medical certificate, has the ability, if you have two of them, to involuntarily commit a patient to hospital to seek treatment and care. It's there right now, Mr. Speaker. And that check and that balance and that accountability, I think, is there because it takes two medical certificates to do this, Mr. Speaker. And with this piece of legislation, that eliminates that process. It goes down to one. And that's where we feel, a lot of the members of my caucus feel uncomfortable with. Not that we feel uncomfortable with the knowledge of the psychiatrist who may make that order, but we feel uncomfortable because it's eliminating one of those checks and balances. It's eliminating one of the safeguards, I think, that currently you need two people to concur that this person is a harm to themselves or harm to another individual, and it's there now. But I think what this piece of legislation does, when it passes, because I undoubtedly know it'll pass with the support of the third party, it will eliminate that. And that's not the steps we need to take to ensure the accountability in healthcare, especially in mental health. We're talking about taking the rights away of an individual, to locking an individual up in a hospital or in a room without their permission. This is a big step. This is a big infringement on their rights. And I'm not saying that we don't need to do that at times. I know we need to do that at times. But with the current system under the Hospital Act, I think and we think that there's more accountability in there than there would be under this proposed piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. And that's what we have some concerns with. Absolutely. The other thing is the moratorium on small options home that we've all heard about over the years. The government has taken the step to deinstitutionalize many of the residents of these larger facilities, if you call them, Mr. Speaker, and especially here in HRM. In my former career, I've been at many of them throughout the years. The Nova Scotia Rehab up in Cole Harbour, which was closed down, and also out in Scotia Nursing Home in Beaverbank. They also had 2 wings there that I went and did calls in those locations many times over the years, Mr. Speaker. And if I'm not mistaken, I would probably say well over 1,000 times over the years I've been up there. And I've seen and I've witnessed the environment they lived in. And many of these residents lived there for 20, 30 years, Mr. Speaker. And when the government took that step to close those areas down, there was the Manor and the Vista section that we used to go to and do calls. And a lot of the calls were to deal with, psychosis events, medical breakdowns, if you wish, Mr. Speaker. And we brought these patients into town to try to get some additional help or treatment that they couldn't get at the facility there. And one of the questions I've always had as a paramedic of dealing with a lot of these patients over the years is, after they've decided to close these places down, they sent them out into the communities, into the small options homes. And many of my colleagues and myself have never heard how these people are faring right now, Mr. Speaker. Was this a positive step? Are they better off where they're at? I just don't know, Mr. Speaker. And with the moratorium on small options homes, I would think that that's an avenue where if you're going to have treatment orders, you're going to need to increase the number of small option homes in our communities, because the communities are going to need the resources. They're going to need an avenue to place these individuals if they're not going to be put into the Nova Scotia or the Abbey Lane areas in the community, that they are going to have to seek their treatment that they're required, or for monitoring. And that's where we have some concerns, Mr. Speaker, of the lack of this government's information on what's going to actually happen when this piece of legislation go through and is enacted, and these treatment orders start to unfold and be given out into the communities throughout this province. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is, as I was saying, the inefficiencies and the lack of resources that we have in our emergency rooms to deal with mental health. This is an area where I think we need to really look at, because I don't feel that a lot of these cases that they need really to be in an emergency room. They need to have fast and quick access to those psychiatrists, to those individuals who are trained to address their needs in a quick time fashion. And again, I'll quote from the Daily News in a letter to the editor, and it was a comment made by Jean Hughes of the Canadian Mental Health Association, and she said to Global News that the emergency room is exactly the wrong environment for someone with a psychiatric emergency. And I have to agree with her on that, Mr. Speaker, because they don't have, for one, the resources or the time to spend with these individuals that are brought into the emergency rooms to seek treatment. There has to be another way to take these patients from that setting and get them into the system quicker, so that they're not leaving the emergency rooms, Mr. Speaker. They're not leaving and going home and pondering and just escalating the thoughts of possible suicide, or like that unfortunate case last week, Mr. Speaker, where this individual left the emergency room because he didn't get seen on a timely manner, or they didn't have the resources or the ability to address his needs at that time. And he left and ended his life, Mr. Speaker. This shouldn't happen. We're not going to be able to stop people from taking their lives. But I know that if the resources were there and the ability for individuals who are at that point where they're crying out for help to get help, and if we give them the access to the professionals that can deal with this quickly enough, I think we can avert many of them from taking that next step, taking that final step of ending their life, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's where this piece of legislation lacks initiatives, lacks information, lacks a commitment from the Minister of Health or this government to put those dollars, put the resources in there that allows this to happen, so that we don't have cases like this happening on a daily basis. And I hope and I encourage the media to continue to report on these situations, because we do need to talk about it, Mr. Speaker. We need to bring awareness around this situation in our communities, in our province. It's there. It's always going to be here. And unless we start talking about it, unless we start discussing the problems seen in the system and in the resources and the lack of the timely services, access to the services, then we're not going to do them any good. I don't think this piece of legislation will prevent any suicide in the future, Mr. Speaker. We need to give these healthcare professionals that are dealing with these individuals on a daily basis the resources they need and the support they need. They need the support from this government. They need the support from this House. And they need support from the communities in the province to allow them to address the needs of individuals who are going through these problems, having a breakdown or a mental health psychosis event. One of the things on our trucks as a paramedic, Mr. Speaker, is a medication that we can give to people who are above that level of conversation and the ability to have them understand what they're going through. So we can drug them, Mr. Speaker. It's easy. Give a shot right in the back end, Mr. Speaker. And within a few minutes, they calm down. You're able to put them on your stretchers. You take them to the hospital. Quick fix, really quick fix. But that doesn't solve the problem. What happens when that medication wears off, Mr. Speaker? That's where we need to look at the additional resources and the services that this individual needs. And by just giving orders that, here, you can take your medication, you got to go take it, go. I don't know if they're going to set up kiosks in all the provinces or communities in this province that people are going to have to go and get their medication or not. But that's not going to be the answer. It's a short-term solution to a big problem that has been neglected for years and years, not only by this government, but by governments throughout the country, Mr. Speaker. And until government decides that it's an important part of healthcare, that it needs and warrants the importance of the funding and the resources that other parts have, then we're not going to address the issues of suicide and mental illness in this province. And I understand that there is many individuals out there, there's groups in this province that support this bill because they see, well, there's finally something going to be done in this province. But it's given them false hope, Mr. Speaker. It's not going to address the root of the problem here, and that is the access in a timely manner to those professionals that can get the help to an individual at the early stages of their illness, Mr. Speaker. Not after they've taken the step of attempted suicide or have harmed somebody, Mr. Speaker, in the early stages of their illness. And that's where we need to catch it. It's all preventable, just like a lot of healthcare issues. I mean, that's the big thing. We seem to react to after an illness, after a heart attack, after you have diabetes. We'll get you some help after that. What we got to look at, and I think all governments have to start looking at, is prevention. And if we can prevent people from having a heart attack, look at the money it'll save the healthcare system. If we can prevent people from having diabetes and the effects and complications of that disease, look at the costs we'd save in healthcare. If we prevent someone from taking that step of harming themselves or harming someone else or escalating to the point where they have a total breakdown, Mr. Speaker, think of the money we could save in healthcare if we have the steps in place to prevent those things. And this is unlike any other section in healthcare. It's preventable, Mr. Speaker. There's always going to be people who are having a hard time coping with their daily lives. We live a stressful lives these days, Mr. Speaker. Everybody knows that. And the thing that hasn't changed over 30 years is the resources, the awareness, the discussions, to bring awareness around the situation and elevate it so that it's not this taboo thing, that it's not something that we should be ashamed of, or that we don't talk about that. You always hear about families saying, well, we have someone in the family that has a mental problem or that, but you shouldn't be ashamed of it. There's people, as I said before, in all walks of life, in all professions, that at one point in their life has had some kind of breakdown maybe, I know many on a personal level, professional level, that have succeeded in getting over that hump, Mr. Speaker, have succeeded in being able to cope with their problems and lead a productive life after their brief period of mental breakdown, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's the key message, is that the resources need to be there. They need to have the ability to seek the help they need and receive it in a timely manner, just like any other health emergencies. Just like if I was having chest pain and I go to the emergency room and I need to see a doctor. It's the same thing, Mr. Speaker. The problem is that it's not so evident when you walk into an emergency room or you seek the advice of a physician, because it's not a physical finding. Right. You can't feel your wrist, your pulse, to say, oh, geez, this guy's ready to have a breakdown. He's ready. He's actually going to commit suicide. And that's why I commend those who spend the time educating themselves and their colleagues in the mental health area, because it's a very stressful and I'm sure hard area to get gratification, because there's not those physical findings you see in all other walks. It's not the glamour of an ERP in this province or emergency room physician where it's a heart attack. Let's shock them. We'll give them some epinephrine or atropine, and we'll cure them. There, the shows like ER and shows like that promote that fast-paced emergency room type help. The individuals that are working in mental health don't have that awareness or that exposure, but they're committed to their profession, and they're committed to trying to seek and provide help and other treatments to these people in our communities that are suffering a psychotic or psychiatric emergency or psychotic event, Mr. Speaker. And if that's the underlying message I can say is that's what we need. We need the resources. We need to have the ability, or those individuals who work in the profession of mental health need the ability and the resources to be there so that they can address the long wait times in our mental health wait lists. One of the things we'd like to say about this piece of legislation also, Mr. Speaker, is that this legislation goes way beyond the ability just to involuntarily place a person into the hospital. As I said before, we have something in place now that I think has some accountability. Many physicians may not choose to take that route to involve another one of their colleagues in the decision to commit somebody against their will to the hospital, and I think that really relays upon the fact that there's not those resources for them. They know that there's limited beds in the province. They know that, okay, we can do this, but is it going to do any better for this patient that I'm seeing at this time to be committed to the hospital and be ordered to seek treatment? So I think if the resources were there for them, that the current bill or the Hospital Act that allows these physicians to involuntarily commit these patients, then I think you might see more of that happening. And I think you might see individuals who are suffering in mental health come out of it a lot better in the long run and save money.
Excuse me, would the honourable member allow for an introduction? Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Close enough.
That was Argyle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to all members of the House. It's indeed an honour and a pleasure to introduce to the House a former MLA, and I may add the former Minister of Natural Resources. So without further ado, the Honourable Ken Mollop.
Recognize all member Sackville-Cobequid.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things I also want to bring awareness around, Mr. Speaker, is those individuals that have contacted us, that those organizations that have expressed their concerns with this piece of legislation, And I know that the Schizophrenia Society, especially in Cape Breton, has stated that they support this bill. And I have all respect for those individuals, because that organization is the Schizophrenia Society of Nova Scotia in Cape Breton consists of family members who have had to deal with patients that have schizophrenia. But I don't think you can just rely on one organization, Mr. Speaker. That's why we opened it up for all organizations to call us. There's people who are with the Schizophrenia Society who have contacted us saying that this doesn't go as far as they would like to see a piece of legislation to change, make changes in mental health that we haven't seen in 30 years. And that's the biggest concern, is this has been 30 years with no changes, and we see this piece of legislation that we feel doesn't go...
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Ask members to take their conversations outside, please. Member Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A piece of legislation that doesn't go far enough, that doesn't have, you would think after 30 years, the resources attached to some of the recommendations and changes we're going to see in this. And that's the concern we have. I know that there's wait times throughout this province for mental health. We have some of them that we were looking at over the last several months. For example, in the South Shore District Health Authority, there's 20 elective cases waiting beyond 90 days for assessment, Mr. Speaker. That's beyond 90 days. That's unreal. If someone's who's in a point in their life that they need assistance, they can't handle the situation they're in, to wait 90 days just to be assessed, and that's unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. In Southwest Nova, there's a wait list in Digby for adults due to staff illnesses and other problems, because of lack of resources in that area of the province, Mr. Speaker. The staffing level hasn't increased for a long time in a lot of these areas that deal with mental health. In Cumberland, Mr. Speaker, non-urgent children and youth, and I know you'll be interested in this, are waiting 6 months for assessment, with non-urgent adults waiting up to 12 months, Mr. Speaker. That's a full year of someone trying to deal with their problems, of families trying to deal with the problem of a family member is going through, Mr. Speaker. That's way too long for these individuals to gain access to services that they need and the procedures and the support they need. And I know that many of the DHAs across the province have the same wait list, Mr. Speaker. I know in Capital Health there's, I think, nearly 1,000 people waiting for assessment and services in HRM here and the outlying areas, which is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. That's where this government should be addressing the problem, is with the wait times. We had a nice big announcement the other day about wait times on the web, Mr. Speaker. So they know that wait times is a problem in this province, and it's not just wait times for elective surgery, for knee surgery, hip surgery. It's for emergency waits. It's for mental health assessments, Mr. Speaker. And to bring a piece of legislation that I don't feel that will address one bit the wait times for mental health in this province, Mr. Speaker. If anything, it'll probably add to them. So that person in Cumberland who's waiting a year now might have to wait a little longer, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think that's right. I think these individuals need to be treated with respect and dignity, just like any other resident in this province when they seek medical help in this province. But because it's a mental health issue, they seem to be less important, less urgent in this province. And I think that's what we need to change. We need to take the stigmatism out of mental health, suicide, and bring it to the forefront and discuss it and assist those who help these individuals and get them the access they need to help and to treatment quicker. Not in 12 months, Mr. Speaker. Imagine the life of an individual that has to wait a year to be assessed by a psychiatrist to see what treatment they may need. And sometimes it's an easy fix, Mr. Speaker. It's a certain medication maybe, a change in lifestyle, change in jobs. Yeah. I mean, these individuals just need someone who's been trained in that area to address their needs, to evaluate what is going on in their life that has caused them to come off the road a bit, I guess, if you want to say. And they just need them to get back on track and continue their life in a productive way. Absolutely. And to wait these times is just unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. So I hope with this process that individuals will come to law amendments, because I know that this bill will go to law amendments, and I hope that they come out, those healthcare professionals that work in the field, those individuals that are suffering mental health episode or trying to seek access to mental health services will come and discuss their problems. Don't be ashamed to discuss that they have these thoughts of suicide or problems coping with their daily lives, because it's not shameful, Mr. Speaker. And I hope this process will bring some more awareness around it, allow the doors to open to organizations, individuals in this province to stand up and start speaking about this. Because we do need to start speaking about this, and we do need to address this. And I think this bill doesn't go far enough to address the needs of those mental health individuals in this province that are seeking resources, seeking support from this government and the healthcare system to get over that impasse in their life. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to further debate on this, and I truly look forward to opening the doors of discussion around mental health, around suicide, and I hope that government is listening when these individuals come and give their stories and explain what it is like to live with a mental health issue or someone, a family member who is dealing with a psychiatric emergency, Mr. Speaker. With that, I'll take my seat.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the Minister of Health to close debate on the bill. Mr. Speaker, obviously we believe this to be a good piece of legislation that will advance the interests of Nova Scotians' health. Mr. Speaker, I can indicate as Minister of Justice that far too often the criminal justice system is used to deal with these kind of matters when in fact the mental health and our health system are the most appropriate venue. And with that, I'm very pleased to close debate and move second reading.
Motion is for second reading of Bill 203. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 203, entitled An Act Respecting Involuntary Psychiatric Treatment.
Bill 203 is referred to Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 222, Tobacco Damages and Healthcare Cost Recovery Act?
Bill number 222. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on this bill to move second reading of the bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill is all about holding the tobacco industry accountable. As many members of the House would be aware, in the United States over the last number of years, there have been a large number of actions commenced by state authorities, state attorneys general, against the tobacco industry to hold those industries accountable to the state for the loss suffered by the state in paying for health care costs. Mr. Speaker, we believe that this legislation sets up a framework which will allow the province of Nova Scotia to take the same kinds of steps as have been taken in other jurisdictions to move forward to hold the tobacco industry accountable. Mr. Speaker, there have obviously been a significant concern expressed by many in the health experts on the failure by tobacco manufacturers to adequately warn their customers of the risks of smoking. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we are all aware of the difficulty that many young people face in dealing with the pervasive advertising of the tobacco industry and attempts to bring in new customers. Mr. Speaker, we believe this legislation will serve Nova Scotians well. First of all, obviously, it will hold the tobacco companies accountable for what they have done. It will be, Mr. Speaker, also beneficial for the health consumers of Nova Scotia, because the money that will be generated potentially by such litigation can assist our health system in dealing with the damaging effects of people who are now addicted to tobacco and find it very difficult to withdraw from that addiction. We also obviously have the health care costs that are accruing to Nova Scotians every year as a result of the terrible damage being done to people's health by tobacco. But further than that, Mr. Speaker, it has been demonstrated in many venues that, particularly in the issue of consumer products, one of the most effective tools in changing the behavior of manufacturers of products is the fact that there are fiscal consequences to their actions. And whether it is in automobile safety or elsewhere, the ability of holding those manufacturers accountable for the foreseeable consequences of their action has made a difference in changing that behavior. I might also add that in the United States, one of the effects of that has been, quite frankly, to drive up the cost of tobacco, which, while we have done that in Nova Scotia through taxes, is further laudable effort, because it's been demonstrated that the cost of cigarettes directly affects the number of people who become addicted to cigarettes. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia will be doing research once this legislation is passed, we'll be doing research towards advancing our case in the courts. And ultimately, we do have to demonstrate our case in the courts. This bill, however, is modeled on a bill that was approved by the Supreme Court of Canada. I see based on that, obviously, constitutional issues with the bill. And furthermore, we have taken the step in Nova Scotia to make our bill, I guess, what I call the most comprehensive model, which is to allow individuals who also believe they have suffered damages as a result of the tobacco industry to commence actions on their own if they choose as well. And some models in some provinces have only provided the province the ability to sue. This bill as well extends that to individual Nova Scotians who may want to bring an action against tobacco companies. So, Mr. Speaker, we believe that this bill is based on the best model in the country. We believe it will protect and advance the health care of Nova Scotians, and that we would ask the honourable members opposite support this bill going on to receiving second reading and going on to law amendments, where I believe many Nova Scotians will also support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the gentleman for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to rise in my place and speak in support of, I think, what is very important legislation. For far too long, the tobacco industry has been able to really market their deadly products without having to face any of the consequences that, in fact, we've had to bear as individuals, as people with good friends and family members who have struggled with the health consequences of addiction to tobacco. And as citizens and taxpayers, we've had to pick up the extraordinary costs that are associated with tobacco addiction and the promotion of these deadly products. I know that I and members of the NDP caucus were very relieved when the Supreme Court of Canada upheld the case that was brought before them that contested the constitutionality, I guess, of the British Columbia legislation. This was a case that had worked its way through many levels of court process, being challenged over and over again by the tobacco industry after the NDP government, I think in probably the late 80s, early 90s, put forward legislation that would empower that province to take the tobacco companies to court in an attempt to hold them accountable and recover the horrendous financial costs on the healthcare system over a long period of time, but also, Mr. Speaker, hopefully to also look into the future, because unfortunately we still have people who smoke in our province, and many of the consequences of those addictions will not be felt for many, many years, and our healthcare system will continue to bear these costs. Mr. Speaker, it's more than 55 years ago that the first significant large-scale scientific studies were published that, in fact, established the link between tobacco use and health impacts, particularly with respect to lung cancer. And approximately 45 years ago, the Canadian Mental Health Association publicly declared that there was a cause and effect relationship between tobacco use and lung cancer. Mr. Speaker, in Canada, approximately 45,000 Canadians die annually as a result of tobacco use. And this is a very, very shocking number or statistic. If you think about combining the total number of deaths in our country from car accidents, from suicides, from murder, from AIDS, and from illicit drug use, all of these things combined are less than the annual rate of mortality as a result of tobacco use in our population. Mr. Speaker, smoking kills 1 in 2 long-term regular smokers, and half of those will not live past middle age. The pressures on our healthcare system in terms of cancer care and also cardiovascular care, heart, stroke, and other forms of respiratory illness and palliative care are dramatic. And I believe that in the process that this bill puts in place, the research will be there to substantiate the incredible impact of tobacco addiction on our healthcare system and our population. Mr. Speaker, of all the smokers who die prematurely, half will die before the age of 70. And on average, those people will lose 23 years of life. If you think about the lost productivity in terms of the contributions those people would have made in their workplaces and in our province, if you think about the impact that may have on a family who perhaps has lost a really important breadwinner or person who is a net contributor to the household income, the impact is great. And so I think when the minister talks about also extending to individuals the capacity or the opportunity to enter into holding the tobacco industry accountable for what has occurred in their individual circumstances, this is a very, very important, I think, and good feature of this legislation. The question, of course, becomes whether or not individuals will be able to exercise those rights. Getting legal representation sometimes can be a difficult and costly effort on the part of individuals, but nevertheless, it is important to have, I think, that feature in the bill. It's interesting, in the last few days when there has been some discussion about the Supreme Court decision and the possibility of suing the tobacco industry, there have been the odd letter to the editor that I've noticed that has really, in some cases, been in support of the tobacco industry. And Mr. Speaker, I think, there are very few of us that should be thinking about shedding any tears for the tobacco industry. This is an industry that has denied the science and the evidence of science of the relationship between tobacco and disease and illness. It is an industry that has aggressively promoted campaigns to, in particular, get young people involved in a deadly addiction. And it is an industry that has been shown and known to obstruct national and provincial tobacco control strategies and policies. We have seen, even with our own smoke-free legislation here in Nova Scotia passed a few years ago, the industry have actively engaged in lobbying to prevent that legislation from going forward, and then, after it was implemented, had paid for the construction of some of the smoke-free some of the smoking areas in the bars in an effort to ensure that there would be continuation of smoking in public places, even though the evidence, the scientific and healthcare evidence, and the public, the will of the public to see the elimination of smoking in public places was clear. This is an industry that in Canada alone, in 1992, more than 10 years ago, the Canadian retail value of that industry at that time was $9.8 billion a year. So this is not an industry that we should feel any obligation to feeling pity for, that big bad government is taking measures to hold this industry accountable. This is an industry that can well look after itself and has done so with impunity for far too long, Mr. Speaker. In Canada, essentially the market here is dominated by three foreign-controlled transnational tobacco companies: Imperial Tobacco, RBH Tobacco, or Philip Morris, and RJR Tobacco. And Mr. Speaker, there is quite a wonderful book. It's very comprehensive in our legislative library called Smoke and Mirrors, The Canadian Tobacco War by Rob Cunningham, who is a lawyer and senior policy analyst who has made a career of researching and attempting to educate parliamentarians at both a federal and provincial level on the nature of the tobacco industry, the impact that this industry has had not only in our country, but now sort of the insidious practices that they have exported into the developing world as they seek out new opportunities to extend their markets and to ensure that they maintain their profits as Western societies become increasingly litigious and anxious to see an elimination, really, of the addictions and the problems that come with their with this industry. Mr. Speaker, I think that in the coming days, this legislation will go before the Law Amendments Committee, and hopefully members of the public will have an opportunity to come and make comment about their perceptions of the bill and how this bill could be used to further the interests of Nova Scotians. I would assume that members of the medical profession in particular, perhaps from Doctors Nova Scotia or other healthcare groups, may want to come forward and make comment on this on this legislation. And I think we should commend the organizations like Doctors Nova Scotia and some of their working groups who have, over the time that I've been in this legislature, certainly lobbied very hard to try to educate members about the importance of making the tobacco industry more accountable and having a very effective tobacco control strategy in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the other groups that we need to, I think, recognize for the hard work that they've put into not only this approach, but also a very robust tobacco control strategy are Smoke-Free Nova Scotia, whose members include groups like the Heart and Stroke Foundation and the Canadian Cancer Society. I think without the grassroots efforts of people who have often been on the front lines of seeing people with emphysema and other chronic and acute conditions, we would not be in this place today where a government, particularly a conservative government, who sometimes are very reluctant to intervene in the market, are prepared to take a strong stand on accountability for corporate irresponsibility. So this is, I think, a testament to the work of those groups who have worked very hard to educate us all and to push us all in a direction of doing the right thing on behalf of citizens in the province. The last point I would make, Mr. Speaker, is that this legislation is a piece of a larger puzzle. Smoke-free legislation is another piece of that puzzle, but the tobacco industry has shown itself to be a very clever industry. As it loses a certain segment of the market, it is always able, it seems, to reproduce its efforts in another area and make up new segments of the market. When the numbers of men who smoked started to fall because so much of the effort of public education was put into trying to educate men and encourage them to stop smoking, the industry shifted their attention somewhat to women, and they had all of those "You've come a long way, baby" advertisements. And after a period of marketing in this way, the numbers of women who smoked actually went up. We've seen now that the tobacco industry are doing things that really try to normalize tobacco as a product with respect to children. And just yesterday here, Mr. Speaker, in the legislature, I tabled pictures of the video displays in the Atlantic superstores that have all of the videotapes, Mr. Speaker, for children and adolescents directly beside the tobacco products. And that's a marketing approach that the tobacco industry is using in retail to try to establish tobacco as a normal activity, part of any kind of a leisure, not unlike eating popcorn, having a movie evening with your friends. These products are displayed in a way that it normalizes the product, and it's no coincidence that we have videos for children and for adolescents being sold beside the tobacco products. And so I think we need to recognize that for what it is. We need to have the power of government coming forward and saying to the tobacco industry, no, we're not going to allow you to do this. We are going to ban point-of-sale advertising of this nature where your products are going to be displayed besides products that are fun, that are entertaining, that are children-oriented. The tobacco strategy in Nova Scotia, it has been working for some groups. We have seen a drop in the numbers of people who are smoking, particularly maybe older adolescents. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, there are people in our communities, young people, young adults, their numbers are going up. The numbers of young people who are in their, between, I think, 22, 23, 24, in that age group, those are the numbers, those are the age groups that continue to smoke, and the numbers in those groups have not dropped, even though we have increased the cost of tobacco, which does act as a deterrent for some people in terms of taking up this habit, and it does also act as a way to encourage people to give up and attempt to find a way to kick the habit. But that brings me to another point, Mr. Speaker, which is, what is the government doing to support people who want to quit smoking in terms of having access to the various counseling and 12-step programs, for example, or any of the pharmacology that people can take, in terms of helping them get through what is a very difficult process, the process of kicking addiction. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this is very important legislation. It's legislation that we support. There are still other pieces that need to be addressed in terms of attempting to deal with the tobacco industry and making them accountable, protecting people, particularly children, and encouraging young adults to quit smoking. And we will continue to work with the government and encourage the government to take those extra measures that will make a difference, both in the short and the long term. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise as the Justice Critic for the Liberal Caucus to say a few words on Bill 222, an act to recover damages and healthcare costs from manufacturers of tobacco. Speaker, as has been already indicated by both the Minister and the member from Halifax Needham, this is legislation that started off in British Columbia, and we've been watching that legislation because the tobacco companies immediately challenged the validity of that legislation and the constitutionality as to whether provinces were legally able to undertake such an action. And needless to say, I believe, Mr. Speaker, it's safe to say all members of this House and a great deal of Canadians were extremely pleased to see the Supreme Court of Canada decision, which has upheld the constitutionality of the provincial legislation from BC to allow that province to move forward to take legal action against tobacco companies for some of the healthcare costs that have emerged as a result of tobacco use. Now, Speaker, our caucus, when the BC legislation first went to Supreme Court, immediately indicated our desire to have the province and the government bring forward similar legislation here in Nova Scotia without delay, even before knowing exactly what the decision from the Supreme Court would be. The idea being that this is something we had to move on right away and to try to have it in place as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the government chose in the spring not to move at that time, but we're certainly pleased to see that the legislation has come forward on this occasion. Mr. Speaker, it's important that we as elected representatives and Nova Scotians be cognizant of the fact that this doesn't mean that next week or in a month from now we're going to have a court case taking on the tobacco companies from the government. This is something that is going to take, unfortunately, quite some time. In fact, I'd say it's probably safe to say that this will take years before such a litigation will take place and before such litigation is decided. So it's important that Nova Scotians not expect there to be a big check coming anytime soon from tobacco companies to our province. But regardless of that, there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to take place on behalf of the government to prepare for such litigation. And I would hope that the Minister and all of the members of government responsible will start to put their case forward through the Department of Health and through the various other agencies to try to quantify exactly how much money it is costing Nova Scotians. I believe a 2000 study indicated it was costing approximately $170 million a year to treat people from various tobacco-related illnesses, especially cancer. Mr. Speaker, it's also important that Nova Scotians be reminded that while this government says it wants to see less smoking and that they want to see their tobacco control strategy work, the Minister of Finance at the same time continues to receive approximately $178 million a year in tobacco taxes. Mr. Speaker, that is a tremendous amount of money, and it's a sign, unfortunately, that Nova Scotians continue to smoke at an alarming and unacceptable rate. What's also disturbing is that while we do hope the government is successful in that tobacco companies are held responsible and do pay damages, it's important that if that is going to happen, that the government clearly indicate that any monies coming from tobacco companies, regardless of how long it might take, are directed towards putting an end to smoking in this province. In doing that, the government would clearly be taking a different direction than what they are currently doing, because as I've indicated, $178 million comes in a year, and yet how much money goes into the provincial tobacco control strategy? Matter of a few $1 million. Mr. Speaker, there are still too many Nova Scotians smoking. I think all of us have also been alarmed to see the amount of our youth who continue to take up smoking. Even though there's so much information out there about the dangers of smoking, how many people who, after smoking for 20, 30, 40 years, have been able to give up because realizing the damaging effect it was having on their health. So we have a lot more work to do on that, and I would hope that the government would continue to make the necessary investments. We're certainly pleased to see that the Smoke-Free Places Act is finally going to have a total ban on smoking in public places by December 2006. Our caucus clearly would have liked to have seen a date earlier than that, but at least now we see that it is coming, and I'm certainly proud, Mr. Speaker, to be able to say that my municipal unit, Richmond, along with all the municipal units in Cape Breton and in the Strait area, have had no smoking in public places, a total ban for over a year now. And guess what? The sky has not fallen, and it's not the end of the world, which is what this government somehow fell into the trap of believing when it first entered discussions about total bans of smoking in public places. Our bars are still there, our halls are still there, and community events continue to take place. What's pleasant, though, is that people come home at night not smelling like tobacco, not having had their lungs filled with tobacco all night, and that's something I believe that everyone is very grateful for. So, Mr. Speaker, with this legislation, we do look forward to the law amendments phase. I'd be curious to see if any of the tobacco companies might send representatives to tell us why we shouldn't put this legislation forward. I think that would be quite amusing. But then again, they may have some sort of compelling argument they'd want to present to us. But Mr. Speaker, tobacco companies have worked hard in promoting their product. We're even told that after the government brought in their smoking ban and the requirement for bar establishments to have smoking rooms, we were quite horrified to learn that tobacco companies actually subsidized and in some cases paid for these smoking rooms. So tobacco companies are still lobbying hard to have their products sold. The government, on one hand, says we want people to stop smoking, yet the Minister of Finance is more than happy to continue to accept the check that comes in for the taxes that are being paid every year. He wants it to go down, but I'm sure he really does, but deep down, unfortunately, this government continues to rely too heavily on tobacco taxes for its bottom line, rather than using that money towards encouraging Nova Scotians with that full amount of money to stop smoking. And I can tell you, if we were investing $178 million a year to convince Nova Scotians to stop smoking, we'd certainly have greater success than what the tobacco control strategy is having right now. But with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased the bill has come forward. I do congratulate the government. There is a tremendous amount of work to do, especially from our Justice Department and our Health Department, and I hope the government will start moving on that now, rather than just continuing to watch the BC case place to see how that proceeds. Let's not be followers here, Mr. Speaker. We're a bit behind BC, but let's join them and let's be sitting there at the table when this case goes forward. Let's not be watching and having Nova Scotians having to wait months or years before this matter can actually be heard. And hopefully at the end, Nova Scotians will receive some of the damages that has been caused to our economy and to our province by tobacco companies for much too many years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize now member for Timberley Prospect.
Speaker, I have my homework for the weekend here as I'm looking forward to continuing the debate on Monday evening when we return. Smoke and mirrors has been highly recommended, and I encourage members opposite when the debate continues on Monday to pay close attention, as we'll be giving comments at that time on this important piece of legislation. With those few comments, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move adjournment of the debate.
Motion is for adjournment debate of number 222. Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader on Monday's hours of business and order of business.
The House to now rise to meet again on Monday at the hour of 7 p.m. The order of business following the daily routine will be public bills for second reading. We'll continue with the present bill that we're on, Bill 222, Mr. Speaker, and then we'll be going through the order paper and the list in the order that they're listed. Thank you.
Motion is the House adjourned until 7 p.m. on Monday. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned until 7 p.m. Monday.